Josiah Trenchard, Part 1. The Might of Fortitude. Chapter 1. Mars. Bullets whined through the air like angry mosquitoes, and the ground heaved as a massive explosion tore the tarmac road into shreds. The sound of the explosion was deafening. Even the rasping lungs of the two soldiers who were running for cover shook and rattled with the deep, resonant boom. The air that they desperately tried to suck in smelled of sulphur and builder's dust, and the purple sky gave everything a sickly pinkish hue. The ruined landscape of Mars's largest city, Fortitude, was as close as they had ever come to the depths of hell itself. The two troopers ducked behind the crumbling corner of a demolished building and covered their heads with their arms until the hail of dust and debris had subsided. When the explosion had spent itself, the younger of the two looked to his comrade and grinned, pushing up the visor of his black helmet to reveal clean eyes on a dirty face. "What's pissed these guys off so much, anyway?" he called above the constant sound of gunfire, clearing his throat loudly and spitting thick black mucus to the ground. The older soldier squared his broad shoulders and grinned back at his comrade, snapping his visor up. "For God's sake, Trench, don't you ever watch the news?" A stray bullet pinged off the masonry above their heads, and the two soldiers instinctively ducked. In the distance, someone was screaming. The sound ceased abruptly after a short burst of gunfire. "Politics bores the fuck out of me, Bird," Trench replied, still grinning. "I don't care why these fuckers are pissed at the government. I'm just here to make sure that they stop shooting at poor munters like me." The United Worlds attack gunship roared overhead. Its deafening jet engines rattled the buildings as it passed slowly over and caused a thick dust to rain down. The gunship hovered for a moment in the purple sky, while the gunners strafed a nearby building with their miniguns, decimating the structure and silencing the sporadic gunfire that was coming from the insurgents within. As relative silence fell, the gunship sped off over the massive chimneys of the distant atmosphere processing plant. The gunship then dwindled slowly into a tiny dot against the vast extinct volcano of Olympus Mons. "Whatever the reason," began Bird, "we have to find out where they're getting their weapons from. And that means interrogating the insurgent leaders." There was another erratic burst of rifle fire from a nearby building. "Come on, Trench," shouted Bird above the din, waving his arms in the direction that he intended them to go. "Let's move it. This low gravity is making me sick to my stomach. The sooner we finish, the sooner we can get back up to the ship for a shower and some scran." "Sounds good to me," replied Trench eagerly. The two soldiers snapped down their visors once more and dashed across a dangerous stretch of open ground, their black uniforms covered with dirt and thick grey dust. They reached the door to a large, officious-looking building and booted it open before carefully entering, rifles raised and torch beams dancing through the hazy air. Bird lowered his rifle and let it hang from the strap while Trench covered the room. He studied the display on his portable GPS unit and, once satisfied, raised his wrist towards his mouth and pressed the communicator switch on his bracelet radio. "Lieutenant Bird to Mobile Command HQ. Come in. Over," he called. There was a burst of static before the reply came through. "Mobile Command HQ here. What's your status? Over." Lieutenant Bird spoke calmly and clearly into the radio. "We've suffered heavy losses to our squad. Only 2 units have reached the target building. What are your instructions? Over." There was a pause while the HQ passed the information up the chain of command. After what seemed like an eternity, the very short reply came through. "Backup unavailable at this time. Proceed as planned. Over." Lieutenant Bird gave Trench a worried look. "Instructions confirmed. Wilco. Lieutenant Bird out." Trench pulled a sour face. "They still want us to go in without any backup," he said incredulously. Lieutenant Bird nodded grimly. "Looks like, yeah," he replied. "I swear," said Trench angrily as he activated the laser target pointer on top of his rifle, "that if I get out of this alive, I'm going to stick my boot so far up the captain's arse that he can taste the dog shit that I just trod in." Lieutenant Bird grinned and switched his own laser pointer on, the pencil-thin beam of red light showing up clearly in the dusty atmosphere. "Lead on, mate," he ordered. Bird and Trench worked their way slowly deeper into the structure. The room that they were looking for would be right at the heart, in the most protected bunker. They rounded a corner and found an inert body lying on the cold concrete floor, covered with blood. The young woman, barely a teenager, was dressed in the uniform of the local militia. Her hand still grasped her pistol, and her eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. "Another one!" exclaimed Trench. Lieutenant Bird knelt by the body to check for a pulse. The body was still warm, but quite dead. "Just like the others," said Bird softly. "Throat slit and left to bleed to death. It's a very clean cut, too." "Special forces?" asked Trench with a furrowed brow. Bird thought for a moment. The wound was very long and precise. "No," he replied thoughtfully. "This is more like an execution." Trench gestured to the bloody boot prints that led off down the corridor in front of them. "Whoever it was has fucking small feet," he observed. "And they're ahead of us," said Bird, a dark, foreboding expression falling across his face. The two soldiers instinctively dropped into a walking crouch and carefully made their way along the corridor, aiming their rifles ahead of them. They found 3 more bodies along the route, before finally arriving at the entrance to a control room full of computers and other electronic paraphernalia. Carefully they edged around the door, which was hanging off its hinges, blasted into pieces by an explosive charge. The scene inside was carnage. Bodies lay everywhere, the command staff of the Martian insurgents. Every single one of them was slashed and drained of blood, which pooled on the floor, resembling used engine oil in the dim red light of the bunker. In the very centre of the room, a slim figure dressed head to toe in black was finishing off the last of the unfortunate command staff with what looked like a short sword. The figure expertly slashed the terrified man from shoulder to gut, spilling his blood and internal organs onto the cold concrete floor. The man crumpled and lay twitching on the floor next to the disfigured bodies of his fallen comrades. Trench and Bird inched gently into the room. The tiny red dots from their rifles aimed steadily at the black figure's head and chest. The figure looked down and studied the red dot on its chest for a moment, before looking straight into Bird's eyes as if daring him to fire. "Don't move!" shouted Lieutenant Bird. "You are under arrest by order of the United World's Peacekeeping Force, under Section—" The figure leapt suddenly, more quickly than it would seem a human was capable of doing. Bird and Trench reacted a moment too slowly and strafed the room with caseless rounds, attempting to keep up with the figure that leapt and dodged their every volley. With a sudden rush, the figure swung off a roof girder and lunged at Trench, catching him with its sword across his neck and chest. He dropped his rifle, clutching at his throat with his gloved hand in an attempt to stop the warm blood that poured from the gash and fell to the floor. Lieutenant Bird angrily attempted to zero in on the black-clad figure and managed to skim a bullet across its thigh. The figure howled with pain and anger. It brought the sword down hard in a wide arc which sliced cleanly through the metal barrel of Bird's rifle. At the same time, the figure leapt feet first at Bird's stomach. Bird's broad frame crumpled like a squashed beer can, and he whacked his head violently on the sharp edge of a console. Despite his helmet, he fell to the floor unconscious. Trench couldn't speak. The blood was filling his convulsing windpipe, bubbling and popping like a bowl of Rice Krispies. He was losing his grasp on his throat, as well as on consciousness. The black-clad figure dropped onto its haunches beside Trench's face and calmly wiped the blood off its sword on his uniform, before sliding it expertly into a sheath tied on its back. As Trench slid into the numbness of unconsciousness, the figure brought its face, hidden under a stretchy black mask, close to Trench's ear, and whispered. The voice was soft, feminine, and had a slight hint of a chocolatey Japanese accent. "You're lucky," she said, as she pulled Trench's dog tags out from beneath his uniform and studied them. "Sub-Lieutenant Josiah Trenchard. My orders weren't to kill United Worlds troopers. Catch you next time." Then the figure reached over and activated the inbuilt distress beacon that was part of Trenchard's bracelet radio, stood up, and raced away down the darkened corridor. The last thought that went through Trench's oxygen-starved mind before everything went black was, "That bitch has a really nice arse."